interesting one. You have quite the silver tongue, Inquisitor. I do hope you put it to good use.
I'd like your opinion of this gathering, my lady.
It's doomed to fade, of course. Celine knows that. At least it should be amusing. We haven't had such a menagerie at court in living memory.
Have you noticed anything odd this evening?
Too few Imperial guards stand in attendance, my dear. A shame. They are so pleasantly decorative.
Good evening, my lady.
Mistress Nightingale, what a pleasure to see you. Doesn't look like negotiations are going well.
Inquisitor, to what do we owe this honor?
We are always delighted to speak with you, of course. Her Imperial Majesty is unfortunately occupied at present.
Perhaps you could tell me something then. We haven't been properly introduced.
How rude of us to forget. My Lord Inquisitor, allow me to present Lady Couteau.
And Lady Colombe.
I told you, Angel, why to walk away?
The Empress's ladies-in-waiting.
I'd like to know more about Empress Celine.
Her Majesty has held the throne since she was just 16 years old.
She is respected and beloved, not just in Orlais, but across Theda. She doesn't care much for liver, and she drinks her tea black.
Get up!
If the evening ends favorably for the Empress, how does the Inquisition benefit?
Her Imperial Majesty brings the might of the Orlesian Empire with her friendship.
She is also a respected diplomat and world leader. She can forge alliances for you with Rivain, Antiva, the Underfells. And she throws the best parties.
I'd like to know more about the negotiations. It seems strange to hold peace talks during a ball.
The nobility must do things very differently in Austria.
By Orlesian tradition, moments of great solemnity are celebrated with revels and feasts. While joyous occasions are given time for reflection and contemplation. We must never forget that life is both bitter and sweet.
The ball is an opportunity to celebrate life and hope for the future, while we mourn those killed in the war.
What can you tell me about the other parties involved in the talks?
Gaspard is a decorated general, much beloved by the Imperial Army, and a legend among chevaliers.
He is better suited to the battlefield than the throne, and he would gladly make his palace a war camp. He's also fiendishly charming. Lady Briella has great intentions to change the lives of the elves for the better. Even if her plans could never work and would only provoke hate crimes against alienages.
She is an idealist, but her lack of patience would prove disastrous.
What is the Empress trying to accomplish with the negotiations?
Peace is her only objective, Inquisitor.
Gaspard and Briella are driven by personal ambitions.
There was no doubt. And I did it in self-defense.
The war must end tonight.
When I opened the freezer,
to deal with the larger
my
crisis.
world crumbled apart. What I found inside wasn't a corpse.
My
Neither was
investigation
a body
turned up
parts.
something interesting.
It was a dead animal. In the freezer were the remains of a deer.
Concerns the
Part
Grand
of its
Duke.
lower half was missing, and his innards were carved out. The blood and guts I'd
He
seen.
made a lot of threats to the Council
What
of
about the
Heralds.
arm I'd witnessed
Grand
last
Duke is
night,
all
though?
talk,
It must have been, but
Very loud talk.
then I saw the legs of the
accompanied by
deer.
swords. He has
What
never
I'd seen
had
had
any
been a
skill
long,
at the game.
thin body part. And only the dark of night and my wild imagination had transformed it into the arm of some person.
Good evening.
Until next
Dear
time.
God, what have I done?
Do take care.
That this old guy really
Enjoy
done
the
nothing
masquerade.
more than create some sort of complicated organic fertilizer. And right at that moment, my instincts activated and I turned to run. I'd already made it to the door of the shack when my mind started to work again. What the hell was I doing? Should I call the police, and what would I tell them? You know, that I'd broken into his place because I thought he was a serial killer?
Slumming even
That
more
he
than
attacked
usual.
me after
I
that,
see.
and I
You've
killed
charmed
him in
some of the nobles.
self-defense.
We'll see how long
Would they
you can
even
keep their
believe
favor.
me?
What brings you to me?
In all black? No. It was much more likely that they thought I'd broken into his shack. He found me stealing his stuff.
I had a
and
question
killed
about
him.
you, Brianna.
Or hell, that
I'm
I
an elf.
came in here and I
Inquisitor.
killed him. Now
That
I'd
should
made
tell
it
you
no
everything
secret
you
to
need to know
anyone
about my life.
that I had
I'm
hated
good
him.
at what I do.
What should I do?
Sylvantos.
First, I
Help
turned
make
off
it
the
no
light
matter
in the shack. Was there anybody nearby? There'd been so much noise, and
I've
as
been
I
told you were
watched and I
romantically
listened,
involved with the
I
Empress.
remembered that
I
no
can
one
take
else
you
lived
for a
near
gossip
enough
monger.
to have heard anything.
Inquisitor.
The
I
only
suppose your
person
spies
who
have
would have
already
heard
briefed you,
anything
so there's no point
would
in
have been no
pretending.
other than me.
Yes.
I
Celine
went
and I
back
were
inside.
lovers.
I closed the door
But
of the
we've
shack
gone
and
our
then the
separate
window.
ways.
I checked the wood splintering on the window and tried my best to get rid of it. It made it look as natural as possible. After that, I put everything back that the old man had pushed off the shelves in his onslaught. And finally, there was the old guy himself. Was he really dead? I touched his neck to see if there was any pulse. Then I looked at his head again and wondered what the hell I was even doing.
What's your story?
For a while,
How was
I
an elf
wondered
invited
what
to
to
the
do.
Empress's ball as
But
an
then I saw
ambassador?
his huge
Empress
fertilizer
Celine and I have-
bags. Old Werner might have been strong, but
There was a time
he
when
was
I
still
put
a
my
scrawny
spies
old
at her
man.
disposal.
The irony
She
was
knows my
not missed on me.
qualifications.
When the
We
old
had a
man's
falling
body
out.
was almost a perfect
Now
fit
we are
for her.
negotiating to
I
determine
pushed
whether
the
I
bag
will
to the
return
front
to
of
her
the
side
shack
in the
and then
war.
started to meticulously clean up the blood. First, I wiped up the floor and the workbench. Then I checked every notch and cranny and used one of his many chemicals to get rid of any blood splatters. I checked the whole place multiple times over. I had to make sure there were no blood splatters left anywhere. Only then did I open the door.
What do you mean we had a
Once
falling
again,
out?
I checked the
She
area.
betrayed me.
Sure, it was dark
Turned me
and
over
not
to the
even
guards on a
30
trumped-up
meters
charge
to the
to save
cornfield.
her political
Yet,
reputation.
I knew if
It wasn't
anyone
personal.
should see me
It's
carrying a
game.
bag of
That's how
fertilizer to
all
his
our
yard
nations
the night
justify
before
these
he went
things to
missing,
themselves. It
well,
wouldn't do
I
to
couldn't
let the
risk
court
it.
know she had an elven.
when I was sure that I was completely
Friend.
alone, I sprinted to the edge of the cornfield with the
If she
heavy
doesn't bring you
bag
back
over
to
my
her
shoulder.
side, what do you intend to
And
do?
once I'd made it,
I have
I
contingency
stumbled
plans.
forward for a few
I'm
more
not a
meters,
child putting all
but
my
luckily
hopes on a
avoided
single ball.
crashing onto the
This
ground.
evening gives me access
For a
to
moment,
Duke
my head
Gaspard.
was spinning,
He's
and I
challenging,
almost passed out
not as
from the sheer
progressive or
exhaustion.
persuadable as his cousin.
I rested the
But
bag
with
between
time
the
and
corn stalks
sufficient
and ran
blackmail,
back to the shack.
He might work with us.
The whole place smelled of the chemicals I'd used. Once more, I went through it, using water to clear away the residue of the chemicals. I also closed off the composter and the freezing box. Before I did that, though, I got part of
You
the
just
animal
told me you have reason
cut
to
it into
betray the
pieces,
Empress.
and
I know
ground it
it's
up with a
incriminating.
mallet.
Few
I
harbor
added the
more
ground
resentment
up
against
meat to
Celine
the
than I.
composter,
But if she
and I
died
made sure
after
to leave
inviting
the
me
bloodied
here,
and dirty
the
tool
court
on
would
the
certainly
workbench.
pin her death on me.
I had to make
An
it
elf
look as if it was the
assassinating the
last
Empress?
thing the old guy had done.
Lineages across our
Now
land,
at this moment, I
across all
noticed something
status,
else.
would be
A
purged.
notebook was stashed
That
away in
cannot
a small shelf above the workbench. When I opened it, I found that it contained the old guy's notes on how to create his special type of fertilizer. It was pages upon pages of ingredients with detailed instructions. I skimmed one of the pages, and it specified how certain ingredients had to be gathered.
You might be interested
On the
in what I
next one,
found.
he clarified that deer meat was best during their mating season,
It's about
in
Gaspard.
autumn or early winter.
He's been
And that
threatening
must
the
have been
nobles on the
reason
Council
for
of
his
Heralds.
secret trips.
Typical.
He was getting deer meat
Gaspard's
for his
always been a bully,
fertilizer.
regardless
All
of the
he'd
Chevalier
been doing
code.
was trying to keep his formula a secret. Once I was outside again, I closed the padlock, careful not to leave any fingerprints on it. Carrying old Werner's body
We'll speak
over
more
to my
later,
house
Ambassador.
took quite a while.
Another time, Inquisitor.
Every 10 meters or so, I had to take a break. Once I'd made it, I hid the body down in my basement. After that, I went back to the cornfield to make sure there were no tracks or blood splatters anywhere. It was an hour or so before dawn when I was finally done with everything. I was utterly exhausted and pretty much fell into my bed. The next day was a blurry mess for me. I spent most of it in bed, curled up under my blanket. Murder is not something from which you move on with your life. You just can't.
My friend.
It was only in that
Come
evening
in,
that I
have a
remembered
drink.
his little notebook.
What can I do for you?
Reading through his notes
You've
was the
been
only thing
busily
that helped me
charming
to
the
turn my
court.
thoughts away from what I'd done. It's not an understatement that the topic of fertilizer
I'd like to know
saved
more
my
about you.
sanity for that day.
All of oil.
Now, I carefully
knows
went
my
over
story.
every page.
But you,
I
my
knew
friend,
damned well
are far too
that I'd not
sensible
be able to turn my harvest around.
The heart of it is simple.
I might try my luck
I
in the
am
greenhouse,
the
though.
rightful heir
And if
to
that
the
would be a
throne of
success,
Olay.
well, I would
But
prepare
my
for next
cousin,
year.
Celine,
During the
is a
next
politician.
days, I
While
procured
I
quite a
am
few
a man
things.
of action.
A composter,
She
different
charmed the
fertilizers,
council
chemicals,
of Herons.
bone meal,
They
and a
gave the
variety
crown
of
to
other
her.
ingredients.
And while it
One
looks
thing I was missing,
fetching on her,
and that I
intend
wasn't
to take
sure
it
of
back.
how to get, was deer meat. But I knew I had a substitute for it in my basement. It was still quite fresh, and most importantly, I had to get rid of it. It was a nasty piece of work, as you can imagine. I almost vomited every couple of minutes.
What's your claim to the throne?
Due to the heat,
The 100
old
days
Werner's
of
body had been
Bavaria
rapidly
in
decomposing.
877.
I
It
almost
killed
threw up
thousands
the
of
moment
children.
I saw his
Royalty
bloated,
and
squishy
common
corpse.
life. There are only
Eventually,
3
though,
living
I got used to
grandchildren
it.
of Emperor
I grew
Nicholas
numb,
I.
or I wasn't ready.
Myself, my
There is
sister
one thing,
Florian,
though. Told
and
myself
Celine,
over and over
and
again.
I
But
am
this
the
was not a
eldest.
person.
By
This was a
rights,
hunk of meat,
the crown
nothing
should
more.
have passed to me.
Once I cut it up, though, it became pieces. The blood, the flesh, the bone, it all became things. And that way, it got easier. I didn't mind anymore. Grinding old man Werner up had become nothing but work in the end. Gruesome work, sure, but still only work. Now, it took me the better part of 2 days, but after that, I ground up the old guy's remains. Finally, I added them to the other ingredients in the composter. It was about a week or so later that the police arrived at my doorstep. I'd never seen an officer like that. Old, tired, and most of all, utterly disinterested in what was going on. He asked me a few questions. The typical, "When have you last seen him?" and other similar ones. I answered them truthfully, and the guy said he'd be back if he needed more information. He checked the old man's
If
property,
you're the rightful
shack,
heir,
the
how did
house,
Celine become
and
emperor?
the only thing he
I am
noticed
the
was
oldest,
that old
but
man
I lack the
Werner must
Valmont
have
name.
gone out in the middle of the
My
night.
mother was the late
It was clear
Emperor's
that this
sister.
officer didn't give a shit.
Celine
He
is
didn't
a
care
Valmont.
what happened here in
Her
this small
honored
village.
father was my
He
mother's
concluded
brother.
that the old man
But
must
she
have
is
walked
the
off
youngest.
and vanished in the
When
middle
there
of
is
the
any
night.
doubt surrounding
They
the
did
line
put
of
together a
succession,
search party,
the matter
but
falls
it was
to
only
the
a few
Council
people,
of Herons.
and they never found a thing.
Celine, out
Old man
prayed,
Werner
forming
became
alliances on
just
my
another
council
name
for support.
added to the list.
So they passed over me in
After
her
this,
favor.
his house was put up for sale, but no one seemed to show any interest. It's now late in the year. The fertilizer I've created has developed nicely. 6 months ago, I upgraded the greenhouse for winter farming. And since then, things have grown well. Really well. The tomatoes are big, ripe, and almost bursting with flavor. The old man indeed created a splendid recipe. What's more interesting, though, is that I can't help but notice how fast and strong the plants have grown. They look even healthier than old Werner's. It might be the unique conditions in the greenhouse. To be honest, though, it might be
What are
due
you
to my
claiming?
own little
Her
addition
crown
to the
or her head?
fertilizer.
If Celine loses
As I'm
her
typing
head,
this
it will
out,
not be mine.
I can't help but laugh
I
at the
want
grim
my
irony
empire.
of the situation.
I do not
The
wish
one way
harm
to
on my cousin, but I would not weep.
Whoops.
man was able to improve his fertilizer even further was by becoming part of it himself. I explain my job? Imagine you work at a convenience store, and the sodas in the fridge started talking
I
to
have
you.
a question about the peace talks.
It's kind of like that. Yeah, I think that about sums it up.
What are you
But
hoping to
instead of a
achieve with the
cashier,
negotiations?
I'm a mortuary assistant.
What is rightfully mine.
I work in a morgue under a hospital. And a few months back, the corpses started talking to me. Now, I know that sounds unbelievable, psychotic, unhinged. But honestly, the dead bodies sitting up and spilling their guts, it isn't even the worst part.
What action
It's
do you
the
have in mind?
things they tell me that make my guts twist.
We cannot allow.
I guess I should start at the beginning. I've always been a good listener. That's one of those natural skills that you can't really learn. You're just born with it.
Strongest nation.
The shoulder to cry on, the sympathetic ear, or any other body parts that can be a cushion for someone's thoughts, desires, and
You
fears.
intend to return to
That's me.
expansionism?
I remember being around 12 or 13 years old and having a deep, serious conversation with my father. Conversations that a man probably shouldn't be having with his son. But, our relationship was always different. Growing up without a mom will do that, I guess. We were always more like friends than a dad and his kid. We'd talk about dad's life, his work, how much he missed mom. Sometimes, how much he really wanted to drink. But I thought it was all for the better. I wouldn't be where I am now if I didn't turn out the way I did. I wouldn't have been blessed. In the beginning, being a corpse handler was something that I sort of fell into by complete accident. I was young at the time, barely starting college. My then girlfriend had a dream of opening her own funeral home. And in a stroke of complete genius and infatuation, I decided that I'd join her. We'd complete school together and start our own joint venture.
What can you
A
tell me about
funeral
Celine
home
and
to
Brianna?
call our own.
Brianna may
The
be
stuff of
called
romance.
ambassador, but she is purely a spy.
Well, as you can
She works
guess,
towards some
things didn't
hidden
work out
agenda.
between us in the end.
Elves have
But
no
I did find that I was honestly fascinated by the job. I'd always been interested in that stuff since Mom died. I was never someone who got queasy at the sight of a bloody injury or a nasty car accident. The first time I actually worked on a dead body, it just felt natural to me. It felt as natural as, well,
You didn't
listening
extend
to
this
people's
invitation out of
problems.
the goodness of your heart, Grand Duke.
I've
As
spent
you
my
might have
entire
guessed,
life as a
I'm
kind
not
of sounding
political.
board for the people I
If the
care.
nobles believe the
Everyone
Inquisition
trusted me.
supports me, it will help in negotiations. And I take joy in watching the scandalized expressions when they see us together.
What will be going on in these negotiations?
We will whittle one another down with words until we are bored into agreement. Celine will talk circles around us,
And it's pretty
an
much
elf
where
will
the
glower and cast suspicion everywhere. And I will get
just
very
got
drunk. Somehow,
so much worse.
when they stop serving drinks,
I've been working at a hospital in St. Clair and slinging dead bodies around for about 3 years. When they asked me to swap to the night shift,
Calamities befall us if they stop
Thought
serving
about it for a
drinks
bit.
early.
pay was better by a few dollars. And I've always been a night person on top of everything else. So I agreed.
I prefer my enemies armed.
I didn't even have any of the typical
I like
fears or
clear
hang-ups
winners
you'd
and
expect.
losers.
The idea of being
Give
alone at
me
night
a
with tons of dead
battlefield
bodies
victor. I will
didn't
show
really
you
scare
who
me.
the victors are.
I knew that the
When
corpses
I
were
am
just
emperor,
that.
there will be
Dead.
no more
At least
of
I thought so.
courtiers nonsense.
God,
The
if I
nobles
could go
may
back in
not
time,
like it, but after a
I'd
few
strangle
lose their
myself
heads,
on the
they'll
spot
follow.
before accepting this job. So like I said, things started out normally enough. Well, enough for a morgue in the basement of a hospital, at least. It wasn't unusual to see messed up, twisted bodies of all colors, shapes, and sizes. There's a lot of different ways a human can die in a major hospital. They didn't all talk, though. Not at first. The first time it happened. I thought my coworker Dave was playing a prank on me.
We'll speak later, you gas.
It was 3 a.m. We just wheeled in the corpses of an elderly man and woman. Their respected causes of death weren't immediately obvious to me. There were no fatal injuries that I could see, so I thought old age was probably a safe bet. We just transferred the first body from the gurney to the slab. I had my back to Dave, filling out some paperwork about the old man. It was going as normally as you'd expect, when a voice cut through the still air. It was that kind of dry, throaty voice that could only belong to something not from this world. It's funny, humans just have some innate ability to sense when something is wrong. My hand froze, the pen hovering over the paper, as the raspy voice let out a single word. Killed. Now in that moment, I'll admit I wasn't really scared. I just laughed and turned around, expecting to see Dave with a stupid grin. Very funny, I quipped. Dave still had his back turned, but he turned around and raised an eyebrow when he heard me. Killed, I repeated, in a half-assed attempt at a zombie voice. The confused look never left Dave's face. What does that mean? He seemed genuinely lost. I chuckled again, a little more hollow this time. Didn't you just... I trailed off before I could finish the question. Dave rolled his eyes. Yeah, good one. Anyway, listen, I need to run to the bathroom. He didn't wait for my response, as he set his clipboard down and left me alone with the two bodies. The room went deathly silent as I heard Dave's footsteps receding up the hall. The only sound left was the hum of the fluorescent lights above my head. I stood there alone, standing still in the freezing morgue. There was just this feeling, like something hanging in the air, some sort of aura. I didn't know how to describe it. My eyes were now locked on the body directly in front of me. The old man. His eyes were closed, his skin pale and wrinkled. I held my breath. And then there was a sound like bones cracking, and the faint squeak of aged and dry rubber wheels rolling gently on cold linoleum. Killed. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as that same hoarse voice drifted through the air. It felt like it was worming its way between my ears and into my brain, and it was coming from behind me. From the other body. Slowly, I turned to face her. I felt the color drain from my face as I saw what was waiting behind me. The dead woman was sitting up on her gurney. Her eyes were still scrunched closed, but a stiff grin had spread across. I've always been interested in that stuff since Mom died. I was never someone who got queasy at the sight of a bloody injury or a nasty car accident. The first time I actually worked on a dead body, it just felt natural to me. It felt as natural as, well, listening to people's problems. I've spent my entire life as a kind of sounding board for the people I care about. Everyone trusted me with their deepest secrets. I don't even think it's that I give the best advice or have the perfect solution to every problem. I usually don't, if I'm being truthful. But sometimes, people just need to be heard. Lately, though, when it comes to my work, my listening skills have been a bit of a problem. I was more than happy being a low-level assistant. I just wanted an easy job that would let me turn my brain off
as I wheeled bodies around. The atmosphere and pace of this type of gig, it suited me just fine. That's how I started in this field, and it's pretty much where the normal part of this story ends. Things just got so much worse. I'd been working at a hospital in St. Clair and slinging dead bodies around for about 3 years when they asked me to swap to the night shift. Thought about it for a bit. Pay was better by a few dollars, and I've always been a night person on top of everything else, so I agreed. I didn't even have any of the typical fears or hang-ups you'd expect. The idea of being alone at night with tons of dead bodies didn't really scare me. I knew that the corpses were just that, dead. At least I thought so. God, if I could go back in time, I'd strangle myself on the spot before accepting this job. So like I said, things started out normally enough. Well, enough for a morgue in the basement of a hospital, at least. It wasn't unusual to see messed up, twisted bodies of all colors, shapes, and sizes. There's a lot of different ways a human can die in a major hospital. They didn't all talk, though. Not at first. The first time it happened, I thought my coworker Dave was playing a prank on me. It was 3 a.m. We just wheeled in the corpses of an elderly man and woman. Their respected causes of death weren't immediately obvious to me. There were no fatal injuries that I could see, so I thought old age was probably a safe bet. We just transferred the first body from the gurney to the slab. I had my back to Dave, filling out some paperwork about the old man. It was going as normally as you'd expect when a voice cut through the still air. It was that kind of dry, throaty voice that could only belong to something not from this world. It's funny, humans just have some innate ability to sense when something is wrong. My hand froze, the pen hovering over the paper, as the raspy voice let out a single word. Killed. Now in that moment, I'll admit I wasn't really scared. I just laughed and turned around, expecting to see Dave with a stupid grin. Very funny, I quipped. Dave still had his back turned, but he turned around and raised an eyebrow when he heard me. Killed, I repeated, in a half-assed attempt at a zombie voice. The confused look never left Dave's face. What does that mean? He seemed genuinely lost. I chuckled again, a little more hollow this time. Didn't you just... I trailed off before I could finish the question. Dave rolled his eyes. Yeah, good one. Anyway, listen, I need to run to the bathroom. He didn't wait for my response, as he set his clipboard down and left me alone with the two bodies. The room went deathly silent as I heard Dave's footsteps proceeding up the hall. The only sound left was the hum of the fluorescent lights above my head. I stood there alone, standing still in the freezing morgue. There was just this feeling, like something hanging in the air, some sort of aura. I didn't know how to describe it. My eyes were now locked on the body directly in front of me. The old man. His eyes were closed, his skin pale and wrinkled.
Good evening, Lady Marcelet.
I held my breath. And then there was a sound like bones cracking, and the faint squeak of aged and dry rubber wheels rolling gently on cold linoleum. Killed. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled as that same hoarse voice drifted through the air. It felt like it was worming its way between my ears and into my brain, and it was coming from behind me. from the other body. Slowly, I turned to face her. I felt the color drain from my face as I saw what was waiting behind me. The dead woman was sitting up on her gurney. Her eyes were still scrunched closed, but a stiff grin had spread across her previously blank face. Her face that was supposed to be dead. I could see her body had begun showing signs of breaking down. Her flesh was discolored and turning purple. Her gray hair was a wiry rat's nest from being roughly transported to the morgue from wherever she had died. I watched in horror as her mouth slowly opened, exposing teeth stained brown from years of smoking. The voice drifted out from her rotting throat again. But it wasn't like the dead woman was speaking. It was almost like her body was just the vessel for a voice coming from another place, like some kind of demented ventriloquist act. Her mouth didn't move. It simply hung open as the withered voice repeated that single word again. Killed, she said. I felt my knees getting weak. Sweat beaded on my forehead. Where the hell was Dave? I guess I still held out a bit of hope that this was all an elaborate joke. And then a cold, clammy hand grasped my shoulder. I didn't need to turn around to know. I already knew who it was. I didn't even hear him get up. Another one of those awful voices from the pit of hell whispered directly in my ear. Have you ever felt someone whisper in your ear? The heat of their breath, almost like there's a warmth to what they're saying. You feel their humanity in every word. There was no humanity here. No breath, no warmth, just icy, alien, nothing. The dead man croaked out 2 words. Our son. I shut my eyes tight, feeling my body shudder in horror. When I opened them, I was in the same room under the same lights, still staring at a corpse sitting up with its mouth wide open. Then there was an awful sound, like wet meat being shoved through a drain. The woman forced her eyes open. They were nothing but milky, empty orbs staring into my soul. Suddenly, she swung her rigid legs around to my side. It's a motion I'm very familiar with. She was trying to get up. Seeing that snapped something in my brain, and I ran. I bolted out of the morgue, crashing through the swinging doors. I nearly knocked over a very confused Dave as he walked down the hall with 2 coffees. I jumped in my car, and I peeled out of the hospital's parking lot. I drove down dark city streets, not really knowing where I wanted to go. I almost crashed a few times. Every time I stopped at a light and tried to close my eyes to calm myself down, all I saw was that open, rotting mouth and those empty eyes. Their voices repeated over and over in my head. Killed our son. It didn't take Sherlock Holmes to figure out what the 2 corpses were implying, but in that moment, I was more concerned with whether I was currently in the middle of some sort of psychotic break. But before I even realized what I was doing, I'd stopped the car. The brain fog I'd had since rushing out of the morgue cleared up a bit. I looked around to see where I'd ended up. By the looks of it, I'd parked on a dingy street somewhere in the suburbs. Dawn was coming up, and faint sunlight was leaking into the night sky. but for the most part, everything was still shrouded in black. I looked at the house I'd stopped in front of, a normal-looking ranch house with a single orange light in the front window. Killed our son. Somehow, I just knew it felt like I didn't have control of my own body as I shut the engine down and left the car.
It was good too, bastards.
I silently walked up the front path to the house's oak door. I knocked on it 3 times with the back of my fist. I wanted to be back in my car, back home in bed. Hell, even back at work with those hideous grinning corpses. This night had transformed into a horrible nightmare. And I just knew that when whoever was inside the house answered their door, things were only going to get worse for me. Slowly, the door swung open.
Must be
Just
the
a
ale
crack.
Koalas people are looking for.
Behind the door
Whoever did this ought to
was
be
a
down here
tired-looking man, probably in his 40s. His eyes were wild, his brow furrowed in suspicion. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. It explained why he was up at 4:30 in the morning anyway. It's probably hard to get a good night's sleep after you've just murdered your parents. I guess neither one of us was really thinking straight in that moment. Who answers the door for a stranger in the middle of the night? When our eyes locked, a vision began playing in my brain. It was a perfect recreation of what had happened. I saw the old couple, the 2 corpses in my morgue, but alive. They're both laying in bed, elderly and sick, and waiting on their son to take care of them. I saw the man in front of me.
This guy's way too fancy.
He was frustrated and fed up. I saw him placing a pillow over his mother's face.
Time to have a word with the Duke.
And then when she stopped moving, he walked across the room and did the same to his father. The man's expression changed from suspicion to confusion as he saw my face glaze over. Our eyes were still locked, and it was like I could see him, but also through him as the vision played out in my head. I wondered why he'd done it. I suppose caring for one sick elderly person takes a lot of something, let alone caring for both of them at once. Or maybe he'd always hated them. The vision I was seeing didn't give any context or explanations. No excuses or justifications. All it showed me was a horrific tragedy playing out to its end. I still had that feeling of being a passenger in my own body as I shouldered my way into the house. It caught the man off guard, and it sent him stumbling back into the foyer. He tried to say something, grabbing at a side table to steady himself. I wasn't a big guy, but the killer was downright puny. I was on top of him, grabbing fistfuls of his matted hair before he could stop me. I don't even know when I started raising my fists up and down, smashing his skull into the floor again and again. At first, between the wet thwacks, I could hear him asking who I was, what I wanted. I didn't even really know the answer to those questions. In that moment, I felt strangely disconnected from the entire thing. I smelled the dark, fresh blood that leaked from the man's crushed skull. I heard the sharp cracking gradually soften as his skull became a lump of jelly. I watched the life leave his wide, terrified eyes. But at the same time, it was like I was watching a scene play out on a TV show. I stared at the stranger I'd become. Blood splashed into the air, dotting my arms and face red. Finally, it was done. I released my vice-like grip on the man's hair. His fractured skull dropped into the puddle of blood with a whip thud. Suddenly, I was back in control. Back in the moment, not just watching it. I staggered backwards, setting myself against the wall. All I could do was sit and stare at what I'd done. What had I done? I was looking at a dead man that I'd just beaten to death with my bare hands. But it didn't really feel like I was the one who did it. I wasn't sure how much of my actions had been under my control from the moment those two bodies started speaking to me. Through the days, I suddenly felt a chill seeping through the air, like that chill I felt in the morgue before this all started. I looked to my left, then to my right. I was still in the man's foyer, but it suddenly seemed so much larger and darker than before. I looked at the man and had to stop a scream. Standing above the dead man, against the dark nothingness the house had become, was the old couple. It was the two rotting corpses that had sent me on this mission. They were here, standing above the body of their son. A too-wide smile was stretched across the woman's face, while the man's face remained blank. They both stared at me as a black mist began to spill from the bloody open mouth of their dead son. I watched it rise in small wisps. It eventually grew into a hazy black form in the shape of a human. The woman stepped forward. Each step shook as she used legs that were no longer meant to function. She reached out and caressed the cloudy figure with her hand. Her massive grin somehow grew even wider as she did. By now, there was just a solid wall of black surrounding us. There was no trace of the house that we should be in. And out of this thick darkness, a massive skeletal hand suddenly reached out. I was frozen to the spot. I wondered if I was actually dead myself. At this point, I'd take that over being clinically insane. The hand was easily 5 times larger than my own head. It's attached to a bony arm that seemed to stretch forever back into darkness. The fingers ended in sharp claws, and the bones themselves looked dry and rotten, like this thing, whatever it was, had been around for centuries. In one quick motion, the giant claw wrapped closed around the mist creature and dragged it back to where it had come. The man and woman shared one last look into my eyes. The old woman gave me a look that almost looked like gratitude. And then everything snapped back to normal. The skeleton creature, the dead couple, the mist figure, it all disappeared. It was just me and the bloody corpse of the man I just murdered. His body was still there. Dark blood still slowly leaked from his mangled skull. No matter how badly I wanted this to be a dream, the part where I killed him had been real. Finally, I felt like I had control over myself again. I stood and ran from the house, making a beeline for my car. I sped home as fast as I could. I'd call work tomorrow, come up with some excuse why I left early. But what did it matter anyway? I was sure the cops would be waking me up soon and arresting me for a murder. The entire drive home, I was torn between wanting to forget and knowing the full truth of what exactly had just happened. Had I been used to right some kind of universal wrong? How would I know the vision I'd seen of the man murdering his parents was even true? I stumbled into my apartment and I collapsed into bed. Thankfully, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep as soon as I closed my eyes. When I woke up hours later, it wasn't because the police were breaking down my door. Instead, my phone was blown up with texts from Dave and my supervisor. I did hope that it was all a nightmare, but one look at the flaking, dried blood that covered me, it was enough proof. I shivered as I remembered that huge skeletal claw emerging from the dark. Several years of being a good employee had earned me some goodwill from management. After I ran out on my last shift, they were more concerned about my well-being than anything else. I quickly made up some excuse about getting food poisoning and apologized for running off. I should have asked to stay home that night. I should have wanted to quit the damn job. But instead, I told them I'd be in that night for my shift, no problem, and I thanked them for their concern. I couldn't get that woman's face out of my head. I keep thinking about that look she'd given me before everything reset itself. Gratitude. Gratefulness. When I arrived at the hospital that night, the whole aura of the place felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, like the sense of waiting for something to happen. I didn't pay Dave much attention, but I could feel his stare on the back of my head when he thought I wasn't paying attention. I guessed he was a little suspicious of my story, not that I cared much. Surprisingly, the shift was pretty normal for the first couple hours. We filled up some paperwork, prepped the bodies, and took down any patients that had died upstairs. But that feeling that something's about to happen, it still hung over my head all night. I was deep cleaning some of the tools when I finally heard it. Another raspy voice echoed through the morgue. Killed. This time, I didn't react with shock. I pretended I didn't even hear anything. I casually looked at Dave from the corner of my eye. If he could hear the voices now too, he wasn't showing it. Good. I wasn't immediately sure where it was coming from though. Unlike the previous night, there were no fresh bodies waiting out in the open to jump at me. It didn't take me long to figure out where I needed to check. The giant wall of stainless steel storage cabinets, where we file the corpses away like paperwork. The voice must be coming from one of these. I knew this was where I'd find the body crying out to be heard. I felt that same force take control of me. I wasn't really in control anymore. But this time, I felt a lot calmer about it. I was instantly drawn to a specific cabinet. I'd logged this one in a few days ago. It was a pretty nasty case. A young guy around my age, whose entire face had been nearly shredded in half. It was determined to be a workplace accident. Sure, an accident, I thought. Killed? I called out to Dave, trying to sound casual. Hey, I'm gonna check on this one from the other day real quick. Can't remember if I filed the tag correctly. Dave said nothing, simply nodding at me. I opened the drawer. Immediately, I was met with a man's cloudy eyes.
Fancy meeting you.
They were open, bulging out as they stared at me.
Dancing, Inquisitor.
They weren't open when I'd put him in there. I know they weren't.
Ambassador,
The man's
we meet again.
wounds had been pretty
Your
bad.
reputation for getting
He'd
results
fallen
is well
face
deserved.
first under the
You cleaned this place
exposed
out.
blades of a
It'll take a
lawnmower
month to
he'd
get all
been
the different
repairing.
blood off the marble. I came down to
His
stay to
mouth,
revenge my missing people.
well,
But you've
it
eaten
essentially
nothing.
had been separated
So,
from the rest of his
the Council
face.
of Errol's emissary in the courtyard.
Deep red gashes
That's not your
ate
work,
through
is it?
his neck, and his cheeks directly below
spark
those
told him
wide, terrified
Knife is
eyes.
a Chalon crest on the hilt.
As I stared down at his mangled face, his jaw began to quiver. The two flopping halves of his face came apart, exposing his chipped teeth and what's left of his tongue.
The Empress needs to know what's going on.
You can try to warn her.
He said
She
quietly.
won't believe anything from me.
I could barely
I
understand him.
misjudged you, Inquisitor. You
I
might
looked
just be an
into
ally
his
worth having.
eyes.
What could you do
And then
with
I
an army
nodded.
of elven spies at your disposal? You should
Pushed,
think about it.
he continued.
You know
My
how to make a
boss.
scene, Ambassador, I'll give you that.
I do.
I didn't run out of the room in a panic
I
this
know where
time.
The wind is blowing.
I simply
I
shut
got
the
coin that you'll be
drawer,
part of the peace talks
and I
before
went
it is
about the
over.
rest of my shift.
And if you happen to
When
learn
I
a little
clocked
bit
out
way,
at the crack of dawn,
it
I got in my car and drove.
advantageous to us both.
I drove until I arrived
Just a thought.
at another normal-looking house that I didn't recognize.
Every single major
I
player
knew
has
there was
tried
a
to
man
bribe you.
inside
In Orlais,
who'd
that
done
means
something
you've officially
horrible.
arrived.
Call it politics or the
This
game
time,
or whatever.
I
That's
didn't wait
personal
in
preference.
confusion. I knew what I had to do. I smashed a window with my elbow, and I climbed into the house. As I dusted myself off, I saw a portly, middle-aged man sleeping in a recliner. A half-empty beer was clutched in one hand. Again, I had a vision. I saw him standing behind the dead man during work. A twisted snarl of rage came over his face as the dead man worked on the lawnmower. Soon, he got the blades running again. He wiped the sweat from his brow and smiled in satisfaction as the lawnmower sputtered to life. Suddenly, the fat man pushed him face first into the whirring blades. A massive spray of red colored the sky and coated the boss. Again, I wondered why, but only for a moment. I guessed it didn't really matter. People did horrible things to each other all the time. Those are just the facts. I walked over and grabbed the beer bottle from the sleeping man. Before he could wake up, I smashed it over his head. He jumped in confusion and pain, nearly falling off the recliner. I took the jagged half of the beer bottle that remained in my hand, and I plunged it into his neck again and again and again until he stopped moving and gasping.
I'll admit,
I stepped back and
didn't think
waited.
The Empress was this sentimental.
The room went dark. The man with a sliced face appeared, giving me that same look of gratitude. I smiled at him. The misty smoke figure rose from the fat man's mouth. I'm still not completely sure what it is. His essence, his soul, his crime, maybe. A manifestation of the evil he'd done. Then from the darkness, the hand appeared. That bony arm connected to something from beyond our world. It reached out and grabbed the mist. I tried to really study it this time. Really try and get a better look. It seemed to linger just a little bit longer this time. Almost like it was waiting for me. Like it wanted me to see. Then it was gone. Everything was gone. And I was alone again with a corpse. There were so many others that needed me to listen. The garbage man who'd murdered his sister. I pushed him into a compactor. I watched as his body splintered and snapped. There was the librarian who'd wanted her husband's insurance money. I smashed her skull with an extra-large encyclopedia. On and on and on. Each time, I was guided by the hand. It would emerge when the deed was done and grab at those wispy figures.
Girl in the kitchen.
I knew what it was.
Keep talking.
I'd spent so much time thinking about it.
I need to get one of those.
It wasn't a demon or some kind of creature from hell. It was the hand of karma,
True what they say?
of destiny.
You're the Inquisitor, are you not? We heard stories of your accomplishments.
I'd wager I have better tales than anything you've heard.
I told you, Philippe. Not everyone fights an archdemon and lives to tell. It's an inspiration.
If you'd like, Commander Cullen could give you all the details of that battle. He's in the ballroom.
Really? But I shouldn't leave my post.
You'd only be gone a moment.
Philippe, the world is coming to an end. If we don't hear this story now, we'll never have a chance.
You're right. Thank you, Inquisitor. Let's go.
Alright, thank you for watching. Dang it, I thought I was on mute again and it wasn't. Anyway, thank you for watching. Video time is up. I'll be back later. Good night.